Greetings everyone, and welcome to the AI World Summit 2020, organized by MyFinB Group. We'd like to thank you for attending this session today entitled Women in Tech, the Roadmap for Female Leadership in the Tech World. The main context for this session is, despite having more women leaders in digital ventures in recent years, the lack of diversity in tech continues to be notable. Will this about to change soon in a seemingly male-dominated sector? What can be done to encourage women to be more active and producing more successful startups and unicorns? This track uncovers ways, and potentially thought-provoking ideas, for women to chart a strategic roadmap to build a meaningful career or impactful venture in the tech sector. We are deeply honored today to have our panel of speakers from Singapore, Malaysia, and Australia, moderated by Zagros Lam, who based in Singapore. Our esteemed panelists comprise of Professor Susela Devi K. Suppiah, a Director, Centre for Accountability and Governance, Sunway University Business School. Marzida Mohammed Noor, Ind. Affin Bank Berhad, Ind. Heriot-Watt University Malaysia, Lead Membership and Activation Pillar, 30% Club Malaysia. The CEO and founder, Fingerprint for Success, which is Michelle Duval. Ketki Sen, the founder and CEO, Ikikkum Pte.Ltd, Top 100 Women in FinTech, Startup Mentor and Advisor. Without much further ado, I leave the digital stage to the chairperson and moderator of this track to continue the session. Over to you, Zagros Lam, and enjoy the wonderful session. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for tuning into this track on the Women in Tech, the Roadmap for Female Leadership in the Tech World. So for all the participants that have been tuning in since this morning at 10, I hope you had a good break and rest. And after the intensive discussions, by the policymakers track, I hope you're still with us and your brain is still able to absorb, the good sharing that my panelists will be able to provide. So earlier on in the introduction, it's mentioned that the tech sector still have a certain perception that it is a male environment playing field. So gender diversity is still an issue and a concern. So as yesterday in one of our tracks and a special sharing, it's mentioned that opportunity given, for ladies in the work environment, it's still unfortunately limited. So today, I'm pleased to be sharing, and moderating a panel with the following ladies from the various backgrounds and countries, with the experiences that they have and they had gone through in their entrepreneurship journey for some of them. They will share with us, some insights on how education, mindset changing, and the importance of diversity plays a part in this tech journey for the female leadership. They will also be sharing on startups in the tech industry involving deep tech and how they are performing, as well as challenges that the women would face while working in the tech environment. So let us now once again welcome Prof. Susela, Marzida, Michelle, and Ketki to the session. Thank you, my fellow panelists. The stage is now yours, Prof. Susela.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Good afternoon, and I'd like to thank MyFinB and team for inviting me to share my perspectives with this panel, esteemed panel of panelists of speakers as well. I'm from Sunway University, and what I'm going to share is my perspectives as an educator. Let me share my screen. Right, so basically I'm speaking as an educator, and my key message is, my take on technology is AI for me is seen as a revolution in technology and a milestone of human brain function. But personally, I see it as a magic wand, a game changer. Gone are the days where some disciplines are male dominated, where it's perceived that women are naturally not equally capable of carrying out challenging tasks. But the game has changed. It is no more a muscle power, but the brain power. In fact, women have much better potential to lead. And as an educator, I see this happening so often. And if you learn to love AI, you can ask the most interesting questions. And that is my first take on switching over to technology era from a very traditional mode of teaching to now the online teaching as well. And I've been in education for the last 35 years, and there's a big transformation that's happening in terms of the mindset of students and parents. So that's what I would like to share with you. And also I noticed that there is, when you look at the literature about women in tech, there is claims that there's not enough women in tech. All it needs is hands on the deck and clearing hurdles for women and girls so they navigate their careers in science, technology, engineering, and maths. There's also that though we do need to do more for women to graduate with technical degrees, it's always not necessary that you have to do science or technology degrees to build a career. And so this is what I like. You don't need a degree in computer science to work in tech. You need gumption and focus. And I like that word, gumption. It's okay not to know something as long as you show that you are intelligent enough to learn it. So based on this, basically, my biggest takeaway from the gender diversity research that I would like to share is that having gender diversity can boost profits and increase productivity, and adding more women in technology can directly influence achieving business goals. And why is that so? Because this concept of general collective intelligence that shows that which relates to groups' ability to perform well across a wide variety of tasks. And studies show that teams' collective intelligence increases with the number of women in the group. The explanation is given is that with women, there's an enhanced social sensitivity, and this leads to higher collective intelligence. So basically, my screen's not moving. So I believe these technological advances are first and foremost to make humans more humane. And that's a key message that I would like to relate and for us to take into consideration. And I also would like to put forth that the SEN debate should also center on alternative interpretations of the role of business and society. While we're talking about women, I think it's also important to see how the role of women in business and society has to come in. So the ultimate goal should actually be to improve human lives. So women are more likely, as the moderator mentioned, likely to underestimate themselves. They don't go for opportunities because they don't imagine themselves as being able to be successful. The strength of the women is in their imagination and in the fact in their micro-computing, micro-complex solution seeking, and macro solution seeking. Okay, so I actually see that there is where the gumption and greed comes in. So let me just share perspective from Sunway University. Is basically we are committed to SDG goals, and within that, of course, there's a focus on the SDG 5, which is gender equality, and therefore the commitment, as well as an educator, we find is that we have the Center for Accountability and Governance, of which I'm the director, is basically looking at continuously engaging, innovating, and impacting wider communities using innovative technologies. And we really seek looking at academia and industry working together in this, leveraging on technology. And I'm proud to say that Mr. Nazri is our adjunct professor of AI for the center, so that we could move ahead on bridging the gap and also changing mindsets. And within this, we have this focus on unconscious biasness. that we talked about earlier, the image of computer science and maths could also be need do with a bit more rebranding. And those who don't appreciate maths enough, or those who find it difficult or mysterious, AI could be the best answer. And as I've heard, it's beyond coding. And so creating a personal learning environment, we also endeavor within the programs and in the teaching, in the curriculum, we try to emphasize the women role models. In fact, our Sunway Education Group CEO and most of the executive committees are women. And we also get involved in terms of opening up to the students case studies and how technology is leveraged upon to successful businesses. And we bring our alumni who are successful technocrats, the technology personalities, to get engaged with the students. So that is also expanding the work-life policies, the flexible work arrangements. These are things which we incorporate into the curriculum in terms of educating the students who will be future leaders in terms of the importance of work-life policies and making technology industry a more comfortable with non-traditional work arrangements. That's all my sharing for the start, and I would like to listen to the rest of the speakers. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Susila. I think it was a very, very good sharing. I've learned a few key points and good learning points from there. And I believe, the participants would have questions to ask thereafter, but we'll push it to the end of the session so that, we can all listen to all the other panelists. So now we have Mazida, basically to share with us her journey. Mazida, please.
Do you have my slide, Zagros?
Hi, committee, can you please assist to flash the slide?
All right.
Hi, everyone. My name is Marzida. Aside from being a board member of MyFinB Berhad and Heriot Watt University, I'm also a working member of the 30% Club, which is a business-led campaign that promotes diversity, equity, and inclusion with a focus on gender balance on boards and C-suites. We encourage businesses to join and support our campaign. We believe that gender diversity on boards and C-suites encourages better leadership governance, but also contribute to better all-round performance. Before I start, what I'd like to do is actually to thank MyFinB for inviting me, as well as having 30% Club as the supporting organization for this event. This was something that just fell on our lap, I think about several weeks ago, and we took up the challenge and participated in 2 tracks plus 1 track today, which is Women in Tech. So before I begin speaking on the topic of women in AI, if you go to the next slide, I'd like to share some statistics of women on boards in Malaysia. 30% Club started in the UK and many chapters established globally, including Malaysia, in 2015. If you look at the chart, as of August 2020, the number of women on boards stand at 17% for all of public listed companies on the Bursa, Malaysian Bursa, and 24.8% for top 100 public listed companies. If you notice, for the top 100 PLCs, we actually dropped slightly compared to 2019. As you know, there have been a lot of changes in 2020 that I think brought about 24.8% women on board. But nonetheless, we are encouraged, even though I think overall the progress has been slow. If you notice how we started in 2014 on, beyond, but I think we are encouraged that Malaysian businesses will find enough momentum to actually move forward and actually work with us to support our campaign. Where are we? Next slide. On the Malaysian corporate current global standing, these are most of the chapters that are established. And if you notice there, UK is about 33, more than 33%. And this is where we are compared to the rest of the other countries. If you go to the, so now what I'll do, the next slide would be to cover on the analysis that I found, yeah, that was conducted by LinkedIn. This should be of no surprise to everyone because, you know, men far outnumber women by 4 to 1. So what happened here is LinkedIn conducted a study for the World Economic Forum. And this is what they found. They actually analyzed all of the profiles of men and women where they actually indicate AI as being their skill sets. So what they found is like, well, women aren't falling behind, but they're also not catching up. So meaning what they're saying is as males are adding AI in their profiles, the women are also following by adding profiles, AI in their profiles. But because, you know, they are equal in terms of at the rate that they're including in their profile, it is, you know, high likelihood that the male AI professionals will continue to outnumber women. And they found this trend over the last 4 years already. And what they found is like women with AI skills are more likely to work in the use and application of AI. So this is very important to note the difference because while men are more likely to work in the development of the technology itself, such as deep learning and neural networks. So this pattern highlight a common concern that fewer women are engaged in the creation of AI and other innovative technologies. Yeah, you're looking at 22% of AI professionals globally are female. This echoes another study that I found about cybersecurity is the same, yeah, similar, where they're only about maybe 20–25% of cybersecurity professionals globally as well, compared to men. If you move to the next slide on challenges facing women in technology, what I've written here, what I've noted here are common challenges in women in technology industry. There's gender stereotyping, yeah, from childhood. Where, you know, to them, STEM is not meant for females. So perhaps this is something that harks back to their, how they are being brought up and the cultural upbringing. You know, so sometimes the female themselves thinks that this is not meant for them, the STEM subjects. And women also don't see technology as a viable career path. Because they're often considered as masculine professions. For example, at Harriet Watt, I asked for some analysis, and what I found was engineering, especially, the men is about 70%, but women is about 30%. And people, consciously or not, yeah, tend to hire and promote people who are like them. So there's tendency for men to hire more men. So if you are in an environment where there's a lot of men, do not be surprised that, you know, more men will be promoted, more men will be taken notice of, yeah, and more men will be given the opportunity. And not to mention the pay inequity that caused, you know, causing women in technology to earn less. And also businesses are not doing enough, yeah, to attract, to recruit, to train, and retain women technology professionals. The next slide. So what I'm trying to do with my slide is actually to be, you know, to challenge the notion, to be a bit provocative, and also maybe cheeky as well. So, you know, so I've put in some funny cartoons as well. If you go to the next slide, when I did my research, I found that the very first text-based chatbot was created in the 1960s. It was named Eliza. And then if you notice in the picture in the more recent years, Sophia by Hanson Robotics and Erica by Hiroshi Ishiguro are perhaps the most famous humanoid celebrities. You probably have seen Sophia, for example. She spoke on 60 Minutes, appeared on The Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon, even had an on-screen date with Will Smith, and Saudi Arabia bestowed her with citizenship. Professor Ishiguro, the creator of Erica, famously said that he was trying to make the most beautiful woman in Erica. And Japanese men went on dates with Erica, and they even blush when they have conversation with Erica, even knowing that Erica is just a robot. So is this progress? Siri by Apple, Cortana by Microsoft, and Alexa by Amazon. Okay, granted, Alexa, you can actually change the voice to that of a male. If you go to the next slide. So my question to members of the audience is, are they female because of the social belief that women are perceived to be better in those roles? Yeah, so it's something to think about, yeah, because I notice quite a lot, even when I call centers and the chatbots and the people answering the recording, for example, they're all women. Now, I know this topic has been discussed, this issue, and I think some of the researchers said that both male and female respond better to a female voice. But you wonder, you know, whether this is because they're so used and because women are perceived to be better in those roles. So, you know, so that got me thinking. If you go to the next slide, can AI be used as a tool to mitigate bias? Of course, AI can remove attributes that lead to bias and detect potential biases. But, change to the next slide, some analysts contend that AI itself could magnify inequality across a range of contexts, as algorithms often reflect the implicit biases of their creators. I'm trying to give an extreme view of both sides of the coins here. So that's why I think what you're hearing now is like AI ethics and corporate digital responsibility have become mainstream topics as part of the wider sustainability agenda. So I think this is one topic that I'm most interested about, that I personally will intend to you know, go into this in more detail in future. So what happens when chatbot and voice assistants are fed on a diet of data assembled by male coders? Yeah. Something to think about. Next slide. Now, you've heard about this notion, right? About, oh, we need to see business case for diversity. McKinsey came out with a claim that there's a business case for diversity. But I came across a blog that challenged the notion of business case for diversity. Now, the author argued that asking for proof that diversity makes business sense is problematic. So she further asked, you know, when was the last time anyone asked for proof that males make good CEOs? Such studies become the fodder that marginalized groups are compelled to cite to convince their executives to engage in superficial inclusion initiatives, when in actual fact, diversity, equity, and inclusion are about reorganizing the world around us and redistributing power and resources. So I found this to be quite profound, yeah, because I struggled with this because I can relate to my own personal experience. I engaged a chair of a company and you know, told him about what we're doing with the 30% Club and how we want more companies to join our campaign. So he turned around and said, yeah, you know, I mean, I support, I understand this needs to be done. We're a very busy company. So you need to show us the business case. So when I read this blog, you know, I mean, I found it to be quite a revelation and very profound. Yeah, it's really about redistributing power and resources. And it's not easy, yeah, as it requires personal as well as collective effort from the business community, as well as the wider stakeholder. Yeah. And then we must understand, yeah, that machines learn what humans teach. Yeah, so at the end of the day, you know, diversity, equity, and inclusion is actually key, yeah, to you know, implementing a more ethical AI. So if you go to the next slide, here are what organizations should consider. So what can organizations do? I could think of three. I'm sure there are more. One of the things that companies could do would be to establish targeted recruitment of women AI professionals. The reason why I put this as number one, because when I joined Shell, I left Shell in 2017, but when I joined Shell, I was actually a product of a targeted recruitment of women leaders in IT. And before I joined Shell, I had zero knowledge. I was clueless about, you know, diversity and inclusion until I joined Shell. So it was an eye-opener for me. Another thing that companies can do would be to develop women AI talent development program. Yeah, making sure that you build a solid pipeline from down right up to C-suites or even beyond. Next, companies can also create a culture of diversity, equity, and inclusion in their organization. Introduce policies and practices that cater to a multi-generational workforce with diverse policies, career, and personal goals. Now, at 30% Club, we invite companies to be visible and support our campaign by joining as members of 30% Club Malaysia and be a part of our ecosystem of business communities to promote and adopt diversity, equity, and inclusion policies and practices in their respective organizations, encourage and support other businesses to do the same. If you go to the next slide, well, sometimes, and this is something that I think we've heard about and we've discussed about when we meet with other women, sometimes women themselves impose self-limiting beliefs. We are our own worst enemy. And I cannot emphasize enough the importance of networking, because I've certainly have benefited from that. Find role models. Yeah, having mentors is very important. And then male allies. Yeah, so 30% Club encourages and actually have a number of male allies working with us in support of the campaign. And then I think women should get involved. Strength in numbers. Yeah, so when you come in together, you have enough confidence to spur each other on and encourage each other on. There are lots of networks out there, even if your company is not conducive, does not provide a conducive environment for women to progress, you can get involved in a lot of the other networking, communities. My last slide. Without change, there can be no progress. On the subject of change, I'm very pleased to inform that 30% Club Malaysia will soon be adopting an evidence-based campaign enabled by a digital membership platform powered by AI. And we would welcome all companies in Malaysia to join us in our campaign. Real change comes only when everyone, men and women, comes along in the journey. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mazida. Next, we have Michelle. She's the CEO and founder of Fingerprint for Success, and she will share with us on global studies in startups, including deep tech, amongst others. Over to you, Michelle.
Thanks so much, everybody. It's a real pleasure and delight to be a part of this esteemed panel. Really interesting, and I'm really enjoying so far what I'm hearing. A little short story about my background. I started my earliest career in the field of professional coaching, and I had an unusual experience of being able to coach some of the world's most senior corporate executives, and also the honor of coaching some of the world's most successful startup founders who have been able to achieve really exceptional outcomes. I personally coached founders of 5 different unicorns. I've also coached over 20 companies that have gone on to have greater than 100, 200, 300, 400, $500 million exits, and then coached many people who have failed and different people at different stages of that journey. While I was working with those who were hugely successful and those who were failing, I started to notice that there were some cognitive differences between the success group versus the failure group. And I had begun collecting qualitative data over a 15-year period that indicated there was definitely some indicators of interest here. So between 2011 and 2013, we completed a world-first research study with a university in the UK and also one of the professors here in Sydney, Australia. And we published the findings from that study in 2016, looking at the correlation between attitude and motivation, so let's call it mindset, and venture outcomes, and also failure. We then repeated the study, but globally. And so we studied founders of tech companies in 55 cities, so thousands and thousands of founders. And again, we were looking for correlations with specific indicators of success. So some of those indicators are around access to capital, the ability to raise and close capital, the ability to scale the venture in terms of size, in terms of number of employees, and the global size of the venture, and going on to be able to have an IPO in whatever country that's in, or being able to sell the venture successfully, which would be called having an exit from that venture. We found significant correlations between specific, what we call motivational traits. So it's important to know here, we're not studying people's personality. We're studying what do people pay attention to, what are their cognitive biases. Now, we've already heard some of the critical distinctions around gender diversity. My lens is to usually chunk up above gender diversity to look at cognitive diversity and to think of gender as one aspect of diversity. And, you know, other studies show, separate from our studies, show that cognitive diversity means that teams of people make much better decisions from an empirical measurement standpoint. They come up with more alternatives due to the diversity of the group. They solve problems more efficiently. Cognitively diverse teams also show to be more innovative and so on. Now, a cognitive diverse team is going to feel more uncomfortable because the decision-making process will take longer. And that's the whole point of a cognitively diverse team, is that you don't jump to a fast conclusion. What we know is that homogeneous teams tend to move decisions quickly, very convinced in the rightness of their decisions because everyone shares a similar view. And so a cognitively diverse team means that we might feel more uncomfortable for longer, and at the end we might feel less convinced about our decision, but the decisions are going to be better lead to better outcomes. So some of the findings that we found for tech enabled companies specifically, I'm going to speak to generally the findings and then some of the gender findings that we found from the research. So we found that those who are successful in a startup, which means getting through and raising capital and getting to the point where they can raise later rounds of funding, have a very high bias towards what we call proactivity, or we call in our platform initiation. I don't know if I've introduced my platform yet. So we've launched a platform called Fingerprint for Success, and the platform is a people analytics, benchmarking, and an AI coaching platform. We've actually launched the world's first personal AI coach in the last couple of weeks, which we've been working on for several years, which enables a number of different AI augmentations and also deep learning through statistical AI models. So some of the findings from the research that we found was a high priority for initiation. So this is a really important distinction to listen to if you are a female in tech. Initiation is the speed at which you turn your ideas into action. It's correlated with more rounds of venture capital. It's correlated with more venture success for both an exit and also scaling towards an IPO. It's one of the most critical findings for our research. Now, here's an interesting thing. Initiation is about going first, not waiting for somebody to start the conversation, start the project, start the business, start the idea. It's being the one to go first. Now, as we know from corporate studies, we know that women have an unconscious bias to often wait for others to take the first step. So we're seeing here in tech, it's a critical criteria to be comfortable to go first. The next one we found is a correlation with big picture abstract thinking, being comfortable and motivated for ambiguity. Ambiguity is having abstract big picture, getting the gist of something, not needing the details to be able to make a decision, versus those who really enjoy the concrete specifics, getting into the very detailed applications of things. We found in our research that those ventures that had global ambitions and launched a global first technology platform have a very high bias for breadth. those who end up being able to scale their technology company to hundreds of thousands of employees have a medium to high bias towards big picture thinking. We also found, interestingly, that in our data sets in tech, that females have a greater bias towards breadth. So this is very exciting, because what I'm about to share with you is one of the key findings from the research. We found that a high bias for details in terms of the leadership of technology teams in a startup was correlated with early stage venture failure. Now, this is important. We're looking at entrepreneurial tech leadership versus the functional roles of what we might do in engineering and AI applications. Now, we did find that in the functional roles of engineering and AI applications, we do see a very high bias towards details, but not necessarily. It was not considered a success factor or a failure factor for the functional roles. But for the leadership roles, which is the focus primarily of this panel, we found that detail orientation was a bias for failure, correlated with failure. So what that means is that females naturally have the bias in our average group that we found for that leadership that's required to be able to get through those early stages of startup territory. Interestingly, we found that successful technology leaders have a high focus on internal reference. Internal reference is trusting your own criteria, authoring your own decisions, and being comfortable to make those captain calls. Now, what we know from corporate research is that females on average are less comfortable to make those decisions than the male counterparts. And so this is an opportunity to realize that you too can develop any one of these cognitive biases. They're flexible, they're adaptable. If you desire to have a path like myself, for example, as a founder of a technology company that has raised global funds and got through various different stages to be able to fund our platform, from many men who've backed our technology platforms, you too can develop the flexibility, the cognitive flexibility to do this. We found that our technology leaders have a very low bias on structure. Now, most academic institutions have a very strong bias to teach people to be very detailed, concrete orientated. We particularly found this in Asia when we did our research findings. We think this comes from social conditioning from parents, but also the institutions, for a bias towards believing that concrete details lead to better outcomes. We found in startups, low structure, low details are actually the success factors. And we found, interestingly, that men in our groups had on average a much lower bias for structure. They were more comfortable to figure things out as they go rather than wanting a structured plan in advance. So when it comes to success in the early stage technology startup, low structure, figuring things out, experimentation and validation is the bias that we're looking for. Interestingly, our male counterparts have a very low on average bias for being comfortable just to figure it out without needing to have the plan. We found that women, for the later stage of growing a venture, naturally have a higher bias for structure. And this was correlated with later stage technology startup success, like a scale up. So what this means as you're listening in is feel comfortable to go first without having the plan. Feel comfortable to trust your gut feel, because this is what the success factors are, whether you're male or female. So don't get caught on whether you're allowed to or not allowed to. Don't seek for permission, because these are the success factors that were correlated with early stage success in technology startups, including those with AI. So I'm going to pause there because my first 10 minutes is up. I look forward to chewing in over these things further.
Thank you, Michelle. It's a very interesting study that you have done, and I think lots of questions will be asked along the way as to why women behave in a certain way and men is like that, and how can they actually work hand in hand together to bring to the next level. So next up we have Ketki. Amongst many of the portfolio that she holds, she also plays a mentorship role for women in the areas of investments and technology. So I'd like to bring the floor over to her to let her share a bit more of what she does, and some of the case studies that she'd like to share. Over to you, Ketki.
Thank you so much, Zachros. It's indeed a pleasure to be here and part of this panel discussion. I've just been listening in awe at all the different perspectives, and I'm just putting forth one more perspective as a woman who has been in tech. So I'm just going to share my screen. So what I call a really moving beyond diversity towards inclusion and unlocking human potential. That's a topic really close to my heart. And that's one of the reasons why I even started a company called Ikikkum, which is really about unlocking people's potential. The most exciting breakthrough of the 21st century, as has been said by John Naisbitt, who's a futurist, will not occur because of technology, but actually because of an expanding concept of what it means to be human. So as we self-examine this question, and as the boundaries between humans and machines start disappearing, this critical examination, this development, building, and policy making all around this, can this be done without 50% of the world's population? That just happens to be women. Okay. So the tech industry has unfortunately been perceived to be and has been a boys' club. But of course, there are efforts to change this with more gender diversity. The statistics have already been shared, and as we all know, in AI especially, it's even lesser, which is 22%, and in ML just 12%. And what research is saying is that women are leaving tech at a significantly higher rate than men, because they feel stalled and isolated. So what can we do to ensure that women continue to join the tech industry, stay there, rise to leadership positions, start up and build successful ventures? They say it takes a village to raise a child. And honestly, that's what it's going to take. It's going to take, with a woman right at the center of it, all the stakeholders in a collaborative and coordinated effort to come together and drive that change. The woman has to drive the change within herself, around her, and with everybody else. So what I like to say is the root is in the stem. It sounds like biological disruption, but it's really what we need. As Barack Obama, ex-President Barack Obama has also said, we need to have more girls interested in math, science, and engineering. So how are we going to do that? It starts really with the stories we tell. Stories have been, through history, a very powerful medium of driving change. So interestingly, recently, HSBC India came out with a book in partnership with Emma Dodd, who's much loved by children, on 3 women. You might have heard of them in your childhood: Cinderella, Rapunzel, and Sleeping Beauty. But no, they're not presented as 3 damsels in distress waiting for the Prince Charming to come, but they morph into business entrepreneurs. One runs a successful shoe business. The other converts the castle she's locked in into an Airbnb and rents it out. And after they've been successful entrepreneurs themselves, they in turn invest in other successful ideas. And those are the stories we really need to tell our children, both men and women, and girls and boys. The other stories we need to tell, as Jennifer Cloer, who has founded the 6-series Serial Chasing Grace, where she's bringing issues of the tech industry to the fore, head on: gender parity, differences, women who have been dismissed, overlooked for promotion, and who are angry. She's saying, yes, that is one part of the reality. But the other reality is that these women rise above these adversities. And it's almost as if they use that adversity for their rocket fuel. And again, these are the stories we need to share very, very clearly. And of course, we need to tell the untold history of women in science and technology, which I never heard while growing up. The media plays a huge role, and hats off to L'Oreal for doing this for us, joining in the messaging that with more women in tech, we'll have more innovation, more patents, more revenue and profitability and employee satisfaction. And yes, we need this for all women. And I salute IBM for coming out with an apology after 52 years to Lynn Conway for firing her despite her being a computer pioneer 52 years ago, because she just dared to be her authentic self as transgender. Today, of course, IBM is a very LGBTQ friendly environment, and I encourage more organizations to do the same. And Lynn Conway, you may not have heard of her, it's her discoveries really that power our smartphones and computers. So what's my story? What defines me? And that girl way back in 1989 was recruited by Citibank and sent to Singapore from India with this load full of guys. I was the only woman, lucky me, for 1 month of core operations training. And today I have more than 25 years behind me across various industries, IT, BPO, banking. I've led large transformation projects, and I've been both an employee as well as an entrepreneur. Today, I sit on the executive committee of an AI startup, which is called Potnotch, as you see down below. And I also am part of the Singapore Cricket Club, again, what is perceived as an erstwhile men's club. I'm part of the finance subcommittee looking after digitalization. So how did I get here? What has been my journey? What were the challenges I faced? What was the support I received? What were my fears? According to a BCG study, every woman has 3 moments of truth, and I had mine too. I was lucky that I was born in an environment where my father, with 3 daughters, treated all of us without a gender lens. I learned to change tires. I learned to, put that nail in the wall. And I pursued an education that I personally was interested in, while I examined science as an option, something my grandmother would have loved, with my uncle being a doctor. But I chose commerce, and then I got the first job also of my choice, Citibank. There I built my first algorithm, not knowing it was an algorithm as such for business process efficiency. And I then took a risk when I was asked to move from what was then considered the sexy corporate bank to the technology group, when the bank set up the first business analyst group. And then I got pregnant. That was my second moment of truth. I had an extremely supportive employer. I had an extremely difficult delivery, and I was 6 months. I got 6 months of paid pregnancy leave, 2 months for when I was in the hospital, 4 months after that. And I also was fortunate to live next to my workplace. I went home to feed my child, but I did find that there were times when I was reaching work late, which was not like me at all, because I wanted to be around my child at feeding times. In those days, we didn't have the facilities for nurseries, etc., at the office premises. So I took the decision to spend more time with my son, and I took a break, a 6-year-long break. But I stayed relevant. I took up part-time jobs. I reinvented myself, and I kept my networks alive. And I got a break whilst it was at, as a part-time consultant at the rock bottom through those networks when I joined an IT BPO company. After 6 years and without having a tech background, I did have imposter syndrome, that I felt I'm not a techie, but I worked hard. I got those male allies to teach me, prep me up before every presentation when I sold IT and then BPO, and I quickly came up the curve. I had a very supportive environment once again, where I was allowed to work from home when I needed to be with my child. And I was given safe accommodation and travel when I traveled to cities which required the same. And I quickly climbed up to the management layer, and my salary was increased. And of course, there were times when I had to ask for the same, and every lady should, get what she's worth. Then came my second career break, when I took a sabbatical, when I discovered my son had learning differences. But yet again, I reinvented myself. I did courses. I became a personal financial advisor, which gave me more flexibility. And through those networks, I was again asked to join back, Citibank in innovation, and I became part of, a very interesting project much before fintech became the buzzword. But having taken so many breaks, my designation did come across the glass ceiling, and that's when I had my third moment of truth. And I went in for meditation and introspection. What do I want next? I was close to 50, but I was still reinventing myself. So with continuous learning and the MIT FinTech course as one part of the first cohort to do that, I continued to do courses in AI, cybersecurity, and I started up an accelerator with my partners out of Silicon Valley. And I continue to leverage my networks and make a difference. I mentor women all the time. I currently run an investment club to also encourage women in financial literacy. So at what notch, what is the gender diversity? I mean, why am I at this company? Why do I love it? It's a 33% team, and the founders, who are male, do not wear any gender lens. 30% of the team is women. Happy to share that. And that's across program managers, business analysts, and API developers. And Malti, who's the program manager, is considered assertive and respected within the organization. And this is what she had to share with me, and I'd like to bring to you all, that her life-changing moment was when she undertook an assertive training course through a very good life coach. And that's something which all women should consider. Not to be passive, not to be aggressive, but just be assertive at your jobs. She also found that she could help her husband, who runs his company, remove biases in recruiting women associated with, if a woman gets pregnant, she's not going to be effective. So all these women are supporting us in developing what is really the cutting edge of technology in the smart spaces space, where we develop bots. We turn normal spaces into smart spaces by creating bots to make systems communicate, to make systems collaborate. And our vision is to provide a framework for smart spaces to act and react. These are the services we create, and happy to share more details if anybody wants later. But the point I'd like to make today is that this is all underlying the principle of inclusion, both in terms of diversity and different challenges and abilities. And we really hope, as the CEO of our company says, we hope to turn the smart into genius. As part of being in this smart spaces space, I recently attended the Doha Smart Cities Summit, and I was very pleasantly surprised to see so many women over there in what we hold as preconceived notions that in the Middle East, women are not there in technology. So I did a little bit of a deep dive. What drives this? Women in cybersecurity, transport, and communication. And I found that this is led right from the top. And there is a woman, a powerful woman, Her Excellency Sheikh Moza, who has laid the manifesto along with His Highness on unlocking human potential across all genders. And they've really invested in this. And they've done it with setting up a Qatar Foundation. They have an education city. There's a huge focus on that. And there are 50 entities today. And you'll be surprised to know that the proportion of women at Carnegie Mellon in Qatar is much higher than that is there in the US. And this is clearly seen, as even Sabine Hall from IBM, based out of Middle East, says that the women in tech in the Middle East are really driving that change. 1 in 3 startups in the region are actually founded by women. And they're working on identifying the roadblocks and ensuring that women continue to stay in the system and rise up to leadership positions. In Singapore too, the government is doing a lot. And there are 2 initiatives to increase gender diversity. There's the Mentor Connect and the SG Women in Tech Community Platform, which gives women opportunities to A, find mentors, B, to network, as well as learn how to find opportunities in jobs as well as startup. Companies like DBS have focused hiring of women in tech, and they actually have online tests which hope to remove the bias which comes through in-person interviews, while of course there would be in-person interviews as well. So what will it take for us to succeed? And I think this has been covered by the others. We need male allies. We can't do it all by ourselves. Bias is really all of our responsibility. And I would encourage people to read these books which are up there. And every organization should have a male ally program. It's hard work. It's not as easy as it seems. And yes, for the founders, you need access to capital. As to why, the proof is out there, the statistics are out there. It improves investment performance, value creation, increased profitability and capital efficiency. But yet, unfortunately, only 2.3 of total VC investments goes to women. So what can be done to change that paradigm? The VCs and the LPs, GPs, they really need to hire diverse talent and make this a focused part of their agenda to invest in women-led startups. The women-led startups are there. There's no shortage of that, as I got to hear from Her Capital, the founder of Her Capital, a female-led seed fund in Singapore. You need these targeted funds, but unfortunately in the region, there is not that much awareness as we see in some parts of the world. And she is facing a challenge to raise capital because most of these large funds would like to invest in $100 million plus funds. And these are angel rounds. And I feel, therefore, the difference would come from women themselves. As women come up the curve and invest themselves, they can invest in others like our Cinderellas in the story. So one of the things I feel which is key, which has also been highlighted by IMF, is financial literacy. And I work with a fintech platform which helps to drive education and make women be much more aware of what are the other financing alternatives out there and to grow their own capital. We have inspirational women in tech investing, Catherine Wood. I would encourage every woman to follow her TED Talks. It's through listening to her that I have really learned to invest in other innovative industries. And I would encourage corporates to look at BCG's research report on what they have found as a status of women in Southeast Asia and their 3 moments of truth. And what can you really do to drive that change? So they have come up with a list of proven measures as well as hidden gems. My esteemed panelists in the previous 3 sections have already covered a lot of these. And I would encourage every organization to actually commit, create awareness, and cultivate these hidden gems. And lastly, I'd like to leave you all with, it's not about gender. It's actually about human equity. Maybe in the future, who knows, I'll just have a male avatar who will be presenting for me. It won't matter whether it's male or female. What will matter is only what I say and do, and achieving my unique potential and enabling others to do the same. So friends, let's turn the smart to genius together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ketki, for your wonderful presentation and many references, many messages that you're actually trying to drive across your presentation itself. So whilst we have some questions actually in the Q&A panel, directing them mainly to Michelle, checking out on your research studies, I also like to pose some questions to the panelists. It's like, for example, what would be the key considerations or strategies that a person should consider to become a successful tech leader? What kind of environment would a lady have to deal with from your experience? Maybe we can write this along the study that Michelle has shared earlier with regards to ladies in the early startups. They kind of having too much bias for details would cause a downfall in the way they run the business. So maybe Michelle, you want to try to answer that question?
Yeah, we didn't find any gender bias, just to clarify, we didn't find a gender bias towards men or women around details. So it's potential that men or women could have a bias for details. We're all just so very unique. But the things that I personally have experienced as a tech founder, particularly in the AI space, don't really specifically lead to me looking through the lens that that's because of my gender. So after coaching so many different founders through the treacherous stages of what it takes to do a startup, what I've observed is that there are many, many different challenges you could communicate to one person and they fully understand your idea and another person doesn't get it. You could have an investor who has written, signed a term sheet, but then doesn't pay the money. There's all sorts of different things that can happen. And so I think it's very important that we as women, we don't look through the lens that occurred because I'm a woman. Because as soon as we position ourselves with that mindset, we're going to activate different tendencies in our body. And exactly as Ketki beautifully illustrated with the narratives and the stories that we've learnt from very early on, we're going to go back into the damsel in distress energy. And we are not going to be creative, we're not going to be assertive, and we're not going to use all the superpowers that you had before. So I choose to realize I need to learn how to communicate to that individual and step above the gender. And I loved how Ketki framed that about being more human in general, and framing above that. So I'll pause there to allow other people to respond to that. But that's my personal experience. It's got me through all of the challenges, whether it be about the tech itself specifically, or whether it be about the startup journey of being a tech founder. If we understand that it's normal to ask questions when you don't understand something, I think it's the biggest barrier to anybody in tech, but particularly for women who fear that they're going to look less than in the eyes of others. And in a normal environment, which I've been a part of, from facilitating and coaching lots of men and lots of women, whether you're male or female, if you don't know something, it's okay. You just need to ask the questions, do the research, be happy to say, what did you mean by that? And they'll explain it to you. But what often happens for a woman is you fear that you'll immediately be diminished in the eyes of whoever has the power, and you don't actually ask the questions and do it. So I encourage you to always ask the questions.
So maybe we can ask, right? What exactly is the issue that would cause a lady to have a fear to ask questions, whether is it in a board meeting, whether is it in a team discussions, or even in projects discussions, right? Back in school, sometimes, the person that actually speaks up more is a male compared to the female itself. So maybe you can share some perspective on that. Is that the way, the culture, the way we are being brought up, or sometimes, how, Mazida mentioned how media perceive, or how media portray ladies should behave, or how certain standards is expected. Maybe we, one of you could share on that, Mazida, or maybe Prof. Prof, you're on mute.
Okay, I'll answer that first before
Sure.
Prof, if you don't mind. Okay, because the way I've been brought up and the way I have entered the working profession is by being gender blind. Right from the beginning, I've never seen that as an issue for me. So similar to what I think Michelle was saying, it's about rising above the fact that you're a female or a male for that matter. And I've never really seen that as an obstacle for me. But I understand that, this may be something that's difficult, to be, adopted by other women. Yeah, so I understand, because I know when I was in Malaysia Airlines heading the IT, it never occurred to me that I was in a privileged position. I thought that I'm just being normal. I'm just competing with the rest of the other people. And I just happen to be in that position where, I'm privileged to be the only, female there. Then looking back, I realized that I could have done a lot more actually to inspire more women to come along, yeah, to give them that courage and the confidence and become their role model. So for me, from my experience, it's about, rising above that. And I'm actually very gender blind. And the way I approach work, and my philosophies in life as well is about, getting things done. If it's not clear or ambiguous, even the better, because then you have the opportunity to then define what you think it should be. Yeah, until someone can come along and say, look, there's something else you should be looking at as well. So that's the way I've seen, and that's my philosophy in life. Thank you.
If I could add to that, Zachros.
Yep, sure, go ahead.
I think some of us women really don't wear a gendered lens ourselves. But the challenge is there is that unconscious bias on the other side, where we are reminded we are women and therefore we need to behave in a certain way. And that's one of the challenges actually as an outspoken a woman who never hesitates to ask questions, because I want to learn. Without asking questions, I'm not going to learn. Or without expressing my opinion, I'm not going to be able to make that difference in that joint decision-making process. So there are unconscious biases at the male end, where culturally it's been that women are in certain roles, they don't really speak so much, and men tend to listen to women much more. So you'll find what I have found tends to happen, and which is why we need really the male allies to call this out, that you as a woman, and with confidence, you've said something maybe 4 times, if not once. And the same thing is not heard. But when a man comes and puts the same thing forward, it's suddenly heard. And so the men need to become conscious of this. And somebody needs to call out, hey, bro, but isn't that something which Ketki just said? So it needs to, because every time a woman calls it out, somehow the defenses of the men also go up, that they are being pulled up. And that's not the intent at all. When a woman says, hey, but didn't I just say that? They say, come on, stop being so sensitive. So we really need those male allies at that time to say exactly what I said. I think that will help.
Interestingly, on the point that you have, I'm just looking at the Q&A. There's one attendee who actually asked, in situations where other party insists on addressing a male, sometimes even more junior than you are, instead of addressing you, how would you deal with it? It's kind of along the line of what you just mentioned. Like you mentioned it once, they didn't hear it. You said 4 times, they still don't hear it. But then a male come in with a male voice, boom, I got it. So how do you come on that?
So I had a very interesting incident, if I could jump in here, where I called my broker, I invest, and he kept addressing me as Mr. Ketki. Now, I don't think my voice is very male. So after some time, I asked him, are you used to only, and I very gently asked him, are you only used to male investors calling in? And poor fellow, he said, yes, ma'am, I'm so sorry. And he was so apologetic. But that's the script he's been given. So I think we women need to be a little patient, but at the same time, we need to say gently, come in and say that it's really nice, reinforce what the junior is saying, because it's not his fault, right? And come in maybe with that cue that what he has said, and add in another point and get your respect back and listening ear back. But it's an art. It takes time and effort to do it very gently.
Can I contribute to that as well? That's happened to me on several occasions. And interestingly, those team members immediately just defer to me. So they'll just say, they'll naturally defer the conversation. And it's quite funny to observe and to watch. And it's kind of, it's a good thing. But I've also been in situations where they haven't actually deferred, and I will just step in and take the floor. So I'll actually, if needed, cut off the junior politely and respectfully, and then invite their opinion at the end so that they still have a voice. But I will do that. But here's the thing, the male will usually go first. So if you come from a hierarchical, patriarchal society, you've all been conditioned to unconsciously wait for the male to go first, and they take it. And so if we want to shift and we want to change this around the table, even if you're uncomfortable, even if it's not natural for you to do it, I regularly feel uncomfortable in these situations because I like to reflect and observe before I jump in. It's not my style to be the first person to set the scene. So my preference is to observe before, because I do better in those situations. But if I need to, I'll be the one when I walk into the room to sit at the position at the table that's going to have the most influence in the room. I'll be the person to start the meeting, even if it's not my meeting. I will just take those steps that feel uncomfortable, so that everyone goes, oh, okay, this person's here. and see how I use the word this person's here, not this woman's here. I'm just another person around the table. So these are some things that we can do, because remember I was saying before that this initiation is the proactivity to go first, and you have to be comfortable. If you go first, you might get it wrong. And that's what feels so uncomfortable, isn't it? That you might get it wrong, you might misread the room or whatever, and you have to learn to be be comfortable with that uncomfortable. Would be my recommendation.
I'd like to add to what Michelle was saying, just my own personal experience. I do feel sometimes the need to hold back and wait for others to ask the question. But there are times when I've pushed myself. I said, look, I'm going to be the first one, to speak up and say something, ask a question, assert my views and opinions, And in more cases than not, I've been noticed because of that. And so that's something that, I would also, advise more of us, men and women, to actually do that, to stretch and get out of your comfort zone. Thank you.
Yes, and on that point, I think, all of us are talking about being willing to step out of the comfort zone, go for the change, and it's at the working level. But how can we go back to the basics, or back to a younger days while we are being educated? How can the educators actually come in to, bring in this kind of mindset since young, to drive into them that they should speak up, they should learn, not to be, worried to be wrong. It's okay to be wrong. There was a quote, right, that our prof mentioned earlier on. It's okay to know, it's okay not to know something, but show that you're intelligent enough to learn it. I like that quote. So, so how can the educators at the young stage help this, whether it's male or female, basically juniors, for them to be confident enough to move forward? How can the education sector play a role? Maybe Prof, you want to share some insights on that?
Thank you for that. Hearing the conversation to get out of the comfort zone, that's related to this. I usually, and my mentors have told me that, that's what I've learned. Always be the first to ask a question. When you're at a seminar or any talk or anything, be the first to ask a question, because after that, nobody ever remembers the other questions. They only remember the first person. So I've always shared that with all my students, every class, so that they make sure they are the first to ask a question. And it's a culture you have to change, because Asians tend not to ask questions. Asian students tend not to ask questions. But this is where, as an educator, it's a philosophy that we drive. We tell them, right, keep on encouraging them to talk and share some stories about our mentors, about some role models and what they've said. And actually, I bring role models into the classroom and encourage them to motivate the students. So I think generally the reticence on the part of the students is more they're shy, but once they break out of that, they tend to talk. And the other is they don't want to be wrong. So when you give them that confidence, it's okay to say what you don't know, it's okay to speak up, things change. So it's a matter of time. I've experimented this in every class at the beginning of the semester. By end of the semester, they've got out of that fear of talking. So I guess as educators, this is a general thing, is we got to engage our students. We got to talk to them as, in kind of sharing our experience, so that they believe in what they're doing. I usually tend to take my students out to meet big names, and so they get confidence in talking in a crowd, or in, so that's a lot of preparation you need to do when you take your students out. But it's kind of, you only have to do with one batch, because it kind of, they tell their juniors and it kind of carries on. So there's a lot of techniques that we could use, and I've used them successfully in my classes to get the students to rise above and about beyond what they initially when they come to you. So that's generally, I think what I hear from the panelists is that get out of the comfort zone, but somebody has to give them the message and the courage to change. And I think educators can do that.
So whatever you shared, the live case studies, the experiences that you bring them exposed to, is it part of a curriculum right now, or you think it's something that should be built into the curriculum moving forward in the education sector?
Yeah, we're talking because on all the universities I've been at, in my previous university as well as in the present, we are trying to get them into experiential learning. And we are looking at ways to give the students the experience. So the best is to bring role models in and get them to share their war stories and engage with the students. And this is the way the Sunway Business School is moving as well. We have a board of advisors who actually regularly come in and have conversations with our students. And I'm still exploring more ways of getting the experts. And I think now when we are looking at shifting mindsets, this is where we need the tech women and startups to actually engage. In fact, Sunway has this iLab where all this engagement is happening, and we're building entrepreneurs from the universities itself. So I think we are all on the right direction. With this, I think it's very encouraging to hear the conversation here. I think it's a lot of ideas to take back.
Perfect, great.
Thank you.
Yes, so I think earlier on, Ketki did mention, she was fortunate enough that she has that she has 3 changes in her life, right? And then she was fortunate enough that her boss was very supportive with her when she went for her pregnancy, her second child, and all that. But what do you think in this current working environment? Is the mentors or even the bosses as encouraging or as supportive compared to the past? How do you feel about that?
Thanks for that question. I think that was for me, right?
Yes.
You're asking me?
Yeah. For Ketki. But Prof, you can share your inputs later too.
Okay. Ketki.
Right. So yes, as I shared, I had, while the start was great, my first 2 moments of truth when I made those career breaks, I had a very supportive environment. At a later stage in life, when I was, in fact, much more sure of myself, I had my 3rd moment of truth where I came across the glass ceiling. There were cases where, I was not invited in meetings. And there was that whole, boys club of going for drinks together, etc. So these are challenges, undoubtedly. And we women need to recognize that and, reach out to the men, make them understand that you're there. You may not every time go for a drink with them, while you might opt to once in a while, but reach out to them to go out for lunch together at lunchtime, find an interesting place, say, hey, I discovered this place to go. Would you like to have that lunch? That's one. And if you've been left out of meetings, I think it's important to go and have that conversation with the, a boss or that other department head, because very often it's an unconscious bias. And so rather than, confront, you could say, at the next meeting, I have these things to value add. Would it be okay if I join in and present it? Or would you like somebody else to present it on my behalf? So it's, you have to take that initiative to make that atmosphere inclusive for you. You can't be passive about it because the world is not going to change. You can only change yourself.
Good advice. Prof, do you have something to share earlier on?
Yes, I can just recount my experience because I was in the accounting profession, and during my days in the audit firm, in the big accounting firm, I was probably one of the first ladies to be qualified accountants, and they don't have many ladies who are married. So I was the first in my firm, I was the first to be married with and expecting a child. So that the amount of concern my bosses, all men, showed in terms of me going out to the audit to the field, carrying files. So they created a section called research and research department, technical department, and I took charge of 5 clients, and the rest of the time I did research, and probably that's why I ended up in the university. But the support that I had, and continuously being told that you go beyond whatever, and I was probably first to even get involved in computer audits, and any new innovation I had the chance to get involved. So it was just the environment that gave me that fear, that motivation to carry on in my field. So I actually share this with my students, female ladies and girls in my class, which is quite inspiring for them. I think having role models and mentors is very important. And of course, all my mentors had been men. Um, but I try my best, as Ketki said, to mentor women. It just, as I think all the panelists, I didn't have a gender bias in my being a only girl with 4 boys, brothers, and I had, you know, didn't see a difference. I did everything what the boys did, but of course I was pampered a lot. They did everything for me, but you know, there's that I didn't have this resistance about boys can do, girls can't do, in that. So that's something I wanted to share. Thank you.
Great. We have about 5 to 6 more minutes before the end of the session. I have just one last question that I would like to end this with. Is that what do young women need to know, hear, see, or to consider technology as their career option? Perhaps we can go around the table, starting with Michelle, since I see you on my top left screen at this point in time. Then we can follow by Ketki, Prof, and then as well as Mazida. All right, we go one round.
I think it comes back to something that Ketki said around role modeling. And we need to see in our families, no matter what the female does in the family, even if the female is choosing not to work, we need to role model in the family the value of the female's voice in the family, in whatever role that she does in the family. And that needs to be supported by all people in the family. So the male in the family, the grandparents in the family, and we need to role model respect for the female voice in the family. And when we can role model that and make space and room for that, that role models to our children that the female voice should be heard. And as we start to role model and encourage that, we can start to allow through new narratives, like Ketki said, the stories we tell, the education systems that Prof has talked about, that we can, on the boards that Mazida has beautifully described, we can start to invite female voices to be able to express the visions, the dreams, and the hopes for humanity. And if we don't cultivate that early, we are snuffling out the greatest innovations that could happen in our world. If the world continues to be male dominated, we will be continuing to be in the year of 2020. And that will not be a good thing for anyone globally. And so we must have more diversity in our leadership. We must have more diversity in our homes. And as we cultivate those voices, we cultivate people to be able to dream the technologies that will evolve humanity.
Great. How about Ketki?
I think Michelle has summarized it beautifully for us, taking the key points from all our presentations. But what I'd like to say is you need to start with self-belief. So teach the girls at a very young age that it's all about self-belief. As you know, Audrey Hepburn said, anything is possible, you know. There's nothing which is impossible. There's possible in impossible. Teach every girl that just live your dreams, and teach the boys that yes, the women can also live the life of their dreams. It's something which we need to do together. It's not going to happen overnight. I mean, I was the only girl way back in 1989, and we're still talking about a 25% ratio. So that journey has to be made step by step, every single day. And we all need to think gender without thinking gender.
Gender blind, the keyword for today.
Yes.
How about Prof. Susila?
I think Michelle and Ketki have summarized it all well. I can't add except echo what they've said.
Okay, thank you. And how about Mazida? You're on mute.
Yeah, and I was trying to unmute myself.
Okay.
I was listening to the two panelists and same with Professor Sila, but I'd like to add a bit of a story. So I grew up in a family, I'm the eldest in the family, so there are 4 of us and 3 sisters and 1 brother. He's the second in the family. So I grew up in an environment where my brother is being treated like a king. Yeah, he can do no wrong. He can go to my dad and ask for money and ask for anything that he wants, and he would get it. And here I am, you know, saving all of my pocket money, you know, to buy things that I wanted, you know. So then I went to my dad and I said, you know, how come you're acting unfairly, you know, to my brother, you know, when I'm the one who's saving the money, you know, and then being budget conscious and, you know, not bothering you by asking for more money. And then he went, that's because I wanted to, you know. So I became very troubled by that, you know. So does that define me? You know, so I ended up thinking, look, you know, if this is not an environment that I could, you know, relate to, what my advice to the girls would be to go out and actually find yourself affinity groups, people that you could actually role model. Yeah. So for example, you know, you never think that, you know, more women can sit on boards. So you talk about the all boys club. By the fact that we've formed some kind of a network amongst women to help ourselves, to help each other, and getting males to come in and work with us to help, you know, the women, we've now built some kind of a women's network now, you know, to actually, you know, help each other and actually move ourselves, progress ourselves to sit on boards. So you'll be very surprised, you know, even if you are in a very, you know, not a positive, you know, family environment, that shouldn't define you. Right? So you must go out there and actually, you know, look for role models, mentors, or even allies that can perhaps, you know, give you a different perspective and give you the right support. Thank you.
If it's
Thank
okay,
you for the sharing.
I'd like to take one of the questions which, you know, the audience has asked, which we've not addressed, because I think that's key. Somebody has asked that, does a woman need to behave like a man? And I think I'd like to end from my side, just be your authentic self. Every man is doing just that.
Okay, thank you. So if I may, just do a quick roundup on some of the key points that have been mentioned and shared by all my fellow panelists. So first thing first, the first keyword that you should remember and take away is gender blind, right? We should be gender blind the way we work and lead a company. We should not be biased in any form of way. Work with men as allies, you know, in our whether is it in the way we do projects or whether when you develop or start up a company. Don't see any genders as a form of a competition, but how do we actually complement the short changes that each of us have. And of course, we must learn to be confident, learn to speak up. Don't be afraid to be, you know, told that you're wrong, because you can learn where you are wrong and you can get better from there. And of course, last but not least, mindset is very important. Self-belief and the ability to make sure that you can step out of your comfort zone. Don't be defined or being you know, branded or be in the circle of how you're being brought up to be what you should be or what you can do. But, you know, believe that this is what you would like to do and what you can achieve. So I think thank you so much for the session, wonderful session and wonderful sharing by all my panelists today. There's a lot of questions that we may not have been able to answer you over this session because we have to stop it, but we do have a portal that we will be able to continue the discussions between the attendees and as well as the panelists. So feel free to register along at the portal. We will push all these questions that was not answered or even have been answered into the portal itself based on this track 5 discussion forum. All right, so once again, thank you very much for the session today.